Celebrate the incredible women transforming the game of cricket. Metrobank are proud to honour three amazing leaders through the Metrobank Champion of Girls Cricket Award, from Anna Davies at Chichester Priory Park Cricket Club to Emma Williams at Ammanford Cricket Club and Sarah John at Sefton Park CC. These women are accelerating action and driving gender equality forward. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly Podcast. The new season is just a few days away. Today is our big fat season preview episode that also includes a chat on the World Cup Qualifier in Pakistan that might well see a genuine title contender not make the tournament. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Katya Witney and Ben Gardner. But first, let's hear from Lauren Winfield-Hill. Lauren, we're just a few days out from the start of the season, just a few days from Yorkshire's first fixture. I guess my first question is, how are pros generally feeling at this point of the season when you're just 3 days away from the big kickoff? What's the mood in the camp generally like in a normal season?
Yeah, I think that it's great. I think especially at the minute we've had blue skies, the weather's been good. I don't know about the rest of the sort of counties, but the wickets are pretty good because the weather's been good. You've generally, there's been a lot of games, like warm-up games you've seen lots of fixtures against each other. And I feel like as a player, you're just like, right, we've ticked everything off now. We're sort of chomping at the bit to get going.
And specifically with Yorkshire moving into a new world in Tier 2, how are you feeling about that? How does the group feel? How do you feel about this new competition effectively?
Yeah, really ready. I think, the girls are shaping up beautifully. We've had internal games and warm-up fixtures and stuff now. So everyone's just really keen to get going and play some competitive cricket. It's a bit of an unknown. You'd usually do analysis and footage and see what's, have a look at players, but there isn't, there's basically nothing out there. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you go in with an open mind and respond and react to whatever sort of happens and how it plays out. So it's different. It's certainly different in terms of just the resources you have available to sort of do your homework beforehand, which you don't have with Tier 2. But I think sometimes that can be a bit of a blessing in disguise. I mean, yeah, we don't know what we're going to get, so we've just been preparing for. It's probably harder to come down in pace bowling, in terms of facing slower bowling than it is to go up. Even for a lot of our youngsters, they're like, oh, we quite like facing the quick stuff. People are more used to that, but it's more of a challenge actually going and facing down the pace.
And how big is the T20 Cup for a Tier 2 side like Yorkshire? A good chance for players and the team to show that they're capable of mixing it with the top teams in the country. Not too long until the first Cup game.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's your opportunity to really pitch where you're at, isn't it? In terms of, okay, well, how close are you, or even beyond some of the Tier 1 teams? I think we've sort of got a bit of an insight into that in the UAE. But to see where you're at when you've got there's obviously Stairs going out on loan, so we won't have her the whole time. So that'll probably be, besides an overseas, is sort of you're at full strength in that as well. So yeah, it'll be good to see where Tier 2 teams are at comparably. And I think also you want to show where you're at against the Tier 1 teams, but I think for some teams, if you're not competing, it'll show where areas of, where you can push on to be able to compete further down the line.
A lot of the best players in the country this week, or the players just outside the England squad, played a really competitive 4-day game against Australia A. Australia A won it in the last over. All four results, I guess, were possible going into the last half an hour of that game. A couple of standout knocks from England players. Paige Schofield and Alice Capsey both scored 100. They put on more than 200 for the fourth wicket in the England first innings. Charlie Knott, the Australia A captain, scored 123 in the second innings for Australia A. I mean, just more generally, Lauren, how good and useful is a tour like this? We saw some really competitive cricket throughout the three formats.
It's so important to have a look at what else is underneath that England team. And I guess the Aussies will feel the same in terms of, none of these players are going to be around forever, I feel like Elise Perry feels like she's probably one that could still go for about another 5 years, and you think that she's going to retire, and then but you need to find the next Elise Perry, the next Nat Sciver-Brunt. Like, they're not going to be around forever. And I think healthy squads, healthy countries have players pushing for spots. Like, you have people on your heels. And I think that's what drives the standard and the desire of the first team and the people in possession of those roles at the minute. Having people pushing you. And I think that's what we've seen. Like, I just can't see a world where Paige Schofield is not in an England squad this summer. Or even playing. I think she's knocked the absolute door down in terms of every opportunity that she's had. Like, we saw that she was obviously picked in that South Africa series, and then unfortunately did her ankle. But I think that just puts another sort of star next to her name in terms of her contributions. I think across different formats as well, like, that's a really good sign of a player that's in her game is in good order. Can you blast, I think her strike rate was like 150 in the second innings, but can also play that long innings. Obviously, it would have done Alice Capsey the world of good. Like, I spoke to her after her knock and I was like, mate, well done. How are you feeling? She said, that's the best I've felt for a long, long time. Just to have the opportunity to just bat and keep batting and, find your groove. And I think sometimes in white ball cricket, you're under constant pressure with strike rates and trying to get going. I think sometimes it's nice to just bat and just reconnect to some really good basics. And obviously, like you said, Charlie Knotts, she's a bit like Georgia Voll, like, in terms of she's now becoming quite consistent in what she's doing. And producing those match-winning knocks more frequently. So I think it's so important. I think, you want to know what else is out there, what's coming through. And also, like, as much as anything, keep people in possession on their toes.
Do you think there's a greater awareness of the need for someone like Capsey, but not just her, but players in her situation, to have opportunities to just bat more? Capsey's obviously played loads of T20 cricket for England. She plays in every T20 league in the world going. But if you look at her 50-over career for England, she's only played 20 or so ODIs, and a lot of them she's batted lower down the order at 6 or 7. And as we've said before, players involved with England over the last couple of years haven't actually played that much 50-over domestic cricket. So at a really basic level, she hasn't had the chance to bat long in games. And I wonder if we're actually, now that T20 cricket has been around for a little bit longer, we've got a slightly better understanding of how important it is, even for your T20 game, just to have the chance to bat in the middle in a game of consequence.
It's even similar with the men, like, there's this gap. They play a lot of Test cricket, they play a lot of T20 cricket, and then they wonder why their 50-over cricket suffered. And it's like, well, it's different. Like, the tempo is different. I think, like, you hear it all the time. Well, it's no different. T20s, we want them to play the same way in 50-over cricket. But I do think to have success in 50-over cricket, it is slightly different. I think you look at really good 50-over cricketers around the world, men's and women's, Elise Perry, Nat Sciver-Brunt, Kane Williamson, Steve Smith. Like, their 50-over mould to their T20 is slightly different. Like, your first 20 balls probably looks different. And we all know, like, once you get past that sort of first 20 balls and you're in that, like, flow state, then the innings takes care of itself. But so often in 50-over cricket, we see players not even get to that stage. And it's about constructing an innings and almost, going through the game and the ups and downs of, you might score, like, if you're a top order player, you might score really quickly and then you'll slow down for a bit and then you'll go again. And it's like, can you actually construct and go with the ebbs and flows of the game? Whereas I think it's sort of like, it's like cool to try and whack everything nowadays. And it's like, yeah, but is that actually bringing you success? Like, hundreds are still hundreds in 50-over cricket. You always have more time than you think. I think it ties in nicely to, like, what Lottie said in terms of her coaching philosophy. Like, there was no intent and brand and ramps and reverses, and it was, we need to win games. And sometimes that's dogged, and sometimes it's gritty and it's very Heather Knight. like Rachel Haynes mold, that sort of like just get the job done. And sometimes it's shiny and sexy and it's blasting to all parts and I think I always think of like I remember a quote from Virat Kohli and he said like my strike rate's not determined by me, it's determined by the surface. So your actual process of what you're trying to do, the shots that you have on offer actually never changes. But sometimes it's flat and doesn't swing, and sometimes it swings and turns and whatever. So and I was like, that actually rings so true because it's like you can bat one day and you think, oh my God, I'm flying. I'm 25 or 15 in a one day, and then the next day you think, well, I've lined up exactly the same. My shots that I have available the same, but it's just bloody hard. That's not me. That's just the surface. So I think I always like think of that, and it's like, yeah, you know what? It sort of resonates quite nicely in that. That's where I think the England team have to be better is recognizing when it's easy, recognizing when it's hard, and what is required in those moments to still, as Lottie says, win the games. Our job is to win games. It's not to have 150 strike rate and then get out because it looks really sexy. It's win games for England.
You mentioned Paige Schofield. There's been a lot of chat around who's going to coach England, who's going to captain England. But from a selection point of view, how dramatic a transformation do you think we'll see in the personnel actually picked for the home series this summer? Or do you think it's going to be a little bit more subtle than what people might imagine? And actually the big change is going to be, as you say, more in terms of how they play their cricket rather than who's playing it for England?
I don't think there'll be a dramatic reset straight away. I think Lottie sort of said that, the players there, and we've spoken about it, isn't it? The players there are the best players in the country, with adding a few like a Page in there. She's one of the best players in the country the last 15 months, I would, in my opinion. I don't think the personnel will change rapidly, but I think even just like including someone like Page then puts pressure on people that are already in the team. So I think she'll go roughly with what's been gone, but she'll expect to see improvements, no doubt. And then if there isn't improvements, then other people get opportunity. Like that's just the game. But I do think probably she'll give people an opportunity and a bit of grace to start with and see what comes out, like see how they perform. But yeah, I would expect to see some new inclusions in squads. I'm just not sure if there'll be a huge shake-up in that 11.
Throwing it forward to Tier 1. Tier 1 kicks off pretty much in a week from now. Obviously, it's a new world. I know it's based on the regional setup from last year, but there have been a fair few personnel changes from the teams that took the field in 2024 to what we'll see in 2025. I guess two questions for you, really. Is there a standout team? And I want you to pick out a player who people should keep an eye on, who we might not have talked about that much on the pod before. And we're not talking about someone who's going to barge into an England squad by the end of the summer, but just like someone whose story might be an interesting one to follow over the course of 2025.
Oh, good questions. I think Notts and Surrey will be strong as the starting points of the teams. Yeah, I just think they're pretty stacked with England or England A type level players. I think those two teams look really strong on paper, especially if you add in like an Amy Jones, a Danny Wyatt into Surrey. Like I know their availability is probably not going to be huge, but they will most likely, from all rumblings, is that they'll be playing some cricket for their domestic, their county teams at the start of the summer. So I think those two teams will be really strong. In terms of I'm actually going to go Stair Callis. It feels like it's a bit of a Yorkshire bias, but I just think she's come back from Australia. And I think it's a fair prediction. It's not just like, oh, Loz is picking her mates. She's crunched runs consistently. She scored runs in UAE. She's pretty much got 40 or 50 in every warm-up game that she's played for Warwickshire. I think she's in really good nick. I think she's come back and she's played a lot of cricket in Australia, albeit only club cricket, but she's learning sort of the art of batting. She's always been a player that's sort of like, she's it's quite aesthetic when she bats. She's got she's got a bit of flair about her. But I just think on the back of, she did pretty well for Birmingham Phoenix in the 100 last year. I think her confidence is growing all the time. Another one I would say is, and she's not a complete left field bolter because she's on the program, but I think Jodie Grucock. I really like her. I think she's a really good player. I think she's particularly in 50 over stuff with the bat. But I think how her leg spins come on, is a really useful weapon as well. So yeah, I reckon those two. I'm trying to think of not just having a batting bias. I'm trying to think of like a spinner who.
I think batting's more interesting in a way because of how many players England have picked on various camps for fast bowling in particular, and we sort of know what the depths in the spin department looks like as well. So I think batting is probably more interesting. I think going into the new year because loads of players have been picked in one squad or another who are fast bowlers. So Stoic Alice, I don't think we've talked about her loads.
I think those two.
Yeah, but she's a really interesting story, right? So for people who don't know, she's Dutch international. I think scored 100 T20 100 for the Netherlands when she was really young. Still is only 24, 25. And you're right to point out that her record in the 100 for someone who's not played, I suppose, top tier international cricket does stand out as being really impressive. I guess the new structure, the new season is a really good opportunity for her to really show how good she is.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just coming together like really nicely for her. I think like she's got that consistency to a game now. Like I said, pretty much most games she's played, I would say out of, I don't know, 8 or 10 games that she's played of late, half of them she's scored 50. Now you want that to be 150 over cricket, but I think she's in really good touch. I think we'll see Tilly Courtine-Coleman just kick on, fly, and show how good she is. Another one's like Kalia Moore. She scored 100 out in the UAE, and she's a really tidy cricketer, really like decent off spinner. Bats down the order for Surrey, but is more than capable.
Nice one. Well, it's an exciting time. I'm fascinated to see how the new season goes. Lauren, best of luck on Saturday and in the new season ahead.
Thank you, mate.
Right, so we're a few days away from the domestic game entering this brand new world. The season starts with the 50 over stuff in the Metrobank One Day Cup. The T20 Cup begins in early-ish May before the blast kicks off in late May. So because the 50 over stuff starting first, we'll focus on that today. Katya, simple question, who looks good on paper?
It's hard to look past Surrey on paper. When you look at their lineup and you see just how many of those England names that they've got. So they've got the top 3. So they've signed Danny Wyatt-Hodge from Vipers to join Sophia Dunkley. They've also got Alice Capsey, Paige Schofield, Rhiannon McDonald-Gay, also some up-and-coming players that we've talked about, like Tilly Courtine-Coleman. They've got Tash Farron, Alice Davidson-Richards. So just reeling off...
Barney Smith.
Reeling off everyone who's been influential in England women's cricket for the last decade or so. And you could think with those England players, if they really decide that they want England players playing during the 50 over competition, like they've said they want England players playing as much as possible, there's quite a lot of that competition they could play, right? Because they don't start against the West Indies until May.
So exactly that. So the breakdown of the season is there are 14 group stage games. The top 4 teams qualify for the semi-finals, then you have a final. You have 7 rounds before I think they go off to play the first international. You then have 1 round where I think you'll have the England players would have just left. So the first 15 players won't be available. You have 2 midsummer rounds where the availability is a little bit harder to work out. And then you have 4 rounds in September when, again, there is no obvious clash with international stuff. So do the maths. 11 out of 14 rounds, potentially, if you're an England player.
Yeah, so if you're Surrey, you're hoping that they actually say to England players, you've got to play as much county cricket as possible because then you've got all of your stars available. But even below that, those names that I've said, a lot of them won't be involved with England. They've got more than enough, you would think. And just from a volume point of view of players as well, you would think they have more than enough. Outside of that, if you look at last year's winners of the RHF trophy, which was Sunrisers, now Essex, they're kind of a bit of an unknown for me. They still look like a side who are developing quite a lot. And they've lost Maddie Villiers to Durham over the winter as well, which would have been a big blow for them. Yeah, they still look like they're quite a young side developing, and I think they did pretty well last year to get to the final of the RHF anyway. So not counting them out, but I think they might struggle more this year, especially with the way the redistribution of players has happened. It's kind of left them looking a little bit light. The other ones to mention are the Blaze. They did quite well in the RHF last year. They finished 5th, so just outside of the qualification places, but they won the Charlotte Edwards Cup, so the T20. They've signed Georgia Elwes, who we heard from last week, over the winter, which feels like a really good signing. They've got some really good overseas players in, like they've got Orla Prendergast. They've also got both Bryce sisters as well, who should be available for a lot of it. They'll lose a couple to England when they're not available, but they also look like they've got a strong side who look like they could be competing. Outside bets for me would be Durham, who have recruited really well over the winter, but I'm not quite sure they'll match up to Surrey and potentially Blaze just yet.
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing for me looking at Essex is that you can see how I think their squad almost illustrates how different this year is going to be, because you look at that and you think that if you're looking at players who are like below that England reckoning and therefore available all the time last year, you can see why they were such strong contenders last time. Whereas now, if you add those England players back into the mix, you can see that it does just a bit short of that first 11 that Surrey can put out. And the other thing with Surrey is, I mean, it's just classic Surrey, isn't it? But it's also just the strength and depth. Like they've got...
It is ludicrous.
Yeah. Like
it's genuinely ludicrous.
They've got more than one England A player who is likely going to have to start the season on the bench. And then it's also actually that kind of similar to some of men's country, where the ideal player is the one who is like just below that England thing. So not, but it's still like so Bryony Smith fits squarely into that, and at least one of Capsey, Dunkley and Schofield will fit into that. ADR as well. Like they are, yeah, they look very, very good. But and yeah, the strength and depth is also something to be reckoned with. So yeah, I mean,
so the only thing I'd say on that, the format of this competition, I think, is pivotal, because I think we can safely say that Surrey and the Blaze are the teams most likely to finish close to the top of the league phase. But it is not a league. It's a league that gets you through to 2 semi-finals and a final in late September. And we don't know the availability of England players then. Injury form and all that comes into it as well. But so much of this competition effectively comes down to how 3 games of cricket take place in literally 5 and a bit months' time.
Yeah, with the September thing as well, you'd think with the World Cup, we don't have the dates for that yet, but it's very up in the air whether those players will be available for that. So you never know. Surrey's mountain of England players that they've picked up might not pay off.
But I think what Surrey have done quite well is, as you guys say, it's not just England players. It's players. They also have lots of players who are not quite England players. Those England cusp players so often decide domestic tournaments. So I think they look very good. I think, yeah, as you say, the Blaze look very good. The Blaze are basically, for all intents and purposes, Nottinghamshire, but they're the only team that has retained their identity from the regional era.
Should also say that Kirsty Gordon's picked up a back stress fracture as well, and she captains the Blaze, so that could also be something to look out for them going forward into the early stage of the season, because I think she will likely be unavailable for the first couple of rounds at least.
Elsewhere, I think there are quite a few other teams who have good England cores, if that makes sense, who, if availability is good, they might not have the most, the deepest squad depth, but they do have like a core of England players who, if they're playing 11 games and if they're available for the knockouts, actually could carry a slightly weaker squad to the competition. I mean, Lancashire, for example, are one that fall into that category. Somerset, to a degree as well.
Yeah, Knight, Gibson, Dean at Somerset. That is a core that could just win you some games, basically. Yeah.
Amanda Jade Wellington for the full season. So there are a few high-profile overseas signings announced for the English domestic season recently. But Elise Perry, for example, is predominantly playing the Blast. Grace Harris, I think, is only playing the Blast. So some of these players are essentially going to be available for that 2-game bit in the middle of the summer for the 50-over competition. I think Lancashire look potentially quite good. They have maybe like a batter light, but they don't have anyone in their top 5 or 6 who's going to get an England call-up, most likely. at the start of the season, so they'll be available for the whole thing. Then in Eccleston, Cross, Mahika Gore, Grace Potts, that is a really strong bowling attack. So I think they look pretty good.
Yeah, because on Lancs it's not going to get disrupted by course, but it's that just below the top tier as well again, isn't it? It's what Eve Jones and Emma Lamb open the batting. We were saying when we were doing the one of the either 100 live stream or the 100 pod that it feels like a big season for Emma Lamb in general in terms of sort of having been a player of promise, but and whether she can come good on that. But if she does, then that's an opening pair to be reckoned with. I'd say, well, Warwickshire, the batting looks a little bit weaker, but it's so exciting having, Davina Perrin up there, opening likely, I guess, with a seam attack and just a bowling attack in general that looks good. And actually, is that a seam attack? So you say Izzy Wong and Emily Arlett, brilliant pair of bowlers, especially if they're on form. But it might be that they maybe win an England call up this through how they go, but aren't in that reckoning quite yet. So
yeah, I was looking at the squads before we were doing this and thinking that the redistribution of that kind of talent or that below England talent has really been a winner from this kind of domestic reboot. As in, you used to have that in the old regional system. It felt like that was very much concentrated in certain parts of the country, particularly down in Southampton and at Surrey, and away from some of the places like Warwickshire and away from Somerset as well. And that feels like this is a really positive effect of the new system, that these signings have been opened up and this talent has kind of spread out a little bit elsewhere, and it makes it a much more interesting competition, especially to follow in the early stages.
It's interesting that we haven't mentioned Hampshire much.
I was just about.
Okay, but given that they were the dominant, Southern Vipers were the dominant side over the regional period of English women's cricket, I think that's it's just some of the players that they've lost basically. So losing Danny White-Hodge, Dean Elwes, it still looks like there's still players there that can threaten.
It's a really good bowling attack,
Yeah.
isn't it? Bell, Davies, Lindsay Smith, Freya Kemp, George Adams in there as well,
and with a keeper who's going to
Charlie
really
Knott.
make the most of
Yeah.
some of those teams. If she stand up to Lauren Bell, sometimes couldn't use Selby.
So yeah, I think Katya, how do you see Hampshire? Because they are so successful. The Vipers were so successful, and they've obviously had a change in their coaching staff as well.
Yeah, it feels like Elise Perry was kind of like Charlotte Edwards' parting gift. I'm sorry, I've got to go, but here's the best all-rounder that's ever lived. That overseas signing does feel slightly different as well, because previously Hampshire have had Australia signings who are kind of value for money, like they had Charlie Knott last year, who came from WBBL working with Edwards, and that kind of feels like what they've done, whereas this kind of feels like we know we've lost a lot of big names, losing Dean and those Elwes and those players that we've mentioned. It feels like they did need a big name coming in. But yeah, it does feel like they are slightly weaker than they have been at previous other times, but you'd be tough to count them out. It all depends on how they manage that transition from Edwards, because by all accounts she was really in charge of that club, and she really grabbed it kind of by the horns and was the one overseeing everything and making sure everything functioned, checking in with players while she was away, everything. So I think managing that transition from Edwards is going to be the most significant part of their season, and even if that's something that they manage across this season, it's hard to see them being out of it for too long, if they even are, to be honest. So yeah, it's one to watch.
It feels like a lot on Georgia Adams then, from a leadership point of view, having been under Edward's stewardship for a little while and being sort of like a titan of the English domestic game, but also having had that a few struggles last year. If she can sort of find her best form again while also sort of taking on some of that leadership, that would be a big thing. And I guess Maya Boucher, we talked about her a lot, and how she hasn't quite cracked it with England. But the reason why she has been in the England conversation for so long is because she has been so dominant at this level. And actually, it could be that her loss is Hampshire's game if England decide that if they want to go another direction, then a whole season of Boucher, and all of a sudden that becomes a pretty formidable prospect, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say that they were so strong previously. I think even with the departures, they still look like one of the stronger sides.
About that below England level talent as well, you've got Freya Kemp and Freya Davies in that side who might not be in, Freya Davies won't, but Freya Kemp might not be in England as much at the minute, plus Lindsay Smith. Ella McCacken as well is really highly rated, so I don't think it's kind of panic stations, but I think it will be a really difficult transition to manage.
That's it for part 2. In part 3, the World Cup qualifier. The World Cup qualifier has been continuing in Pakistan. A reminder that the top 2 out of the 6 teams in the competition go to the World Cup proper in India later in the year. First off, Ben, West Indies in real trouble.
Yeah, they are. They've got a massive game tomorrow or Thursday, whenever you're listening to this, against Bangladesh.
Probably as people are listening.
So as you're listening to this, go and look up the scorecard for Bangladesh against West Indies. I mean, West Indies, they need to win that to have any chance of going through. So they've won 1, lost 2 so far, whereas Bangladesh and Pakistan have both played 3, won 3, so they're in pole position. But it's not. If West Indies win that, they will have a decent chance of going through, but they will still be looking nervously at Pakistan, Bangladesh on the final day of the competition, because if Bangladesh were to win that and Pakistan were to beat Thailand, that's again probably as you're listening as well, then that would, so it's not in West Indies' hands basically. What they need to happen is they need to beat Bangladesh, then they need Pakistan to beat Bangladesh as well, and then they will play. That they will finish the game against Thailand, knowing what they need to do in terms of net run rate to overtake Bangladesh. But I guess it's a funny situation, the qualifier, where there's been so many interesting games and close games and surprise results and that sort of thing, and yet it's possible that it becomes not actually an exciting end to the competition because Bangladesh and Pakistan have sort of surprised people a little bit. I think with quite how strong they've been, especially in that West Indies game. And Bangladesh have kind of delivered on a bit of pre-tournament hype, albeit having played the 3 weaker sides, I guess, so far. So it's and Ireland, I guess, have been the ones who've been almost most unfortunate. They've lost two very close games, 1 quite close game, and that's them out of the competition. Shows how brutal this format is, I guess.
Katya, West Indies were 9 runs away from reaching a T20 World Cup. How are they in this situation? They came on the wrong side of an epic game against Scotland that was very exciting, partly just to work out what was going on with Hayley Matthews from afar.
Yeah, so we discussed it last week, but it's such a good game. It's kind of worth discussing again, to be honest. And it also in the picture of the way this World Cup qualifier will go, or the story that will be told, that game is such a crucial game looking back on it, even though it was, I think, the second match of the entire tournament. But they lost it, West Indies, by 11 runs in the end, with Hayley Matthews having retired her twice with a ridiculous amount of cramp, and then coming on and being left stranded on 100 at the end, having already taken 4 wickets in the match as well. But the issue is how much the West Indies have relied on Hayley Matthews, and that's not a new problem. That's always been happening, but it's happened to an extreme extent in this tournament. She's currently the tournament's leading wicket taker, and she's also the West Indies leading run scorer by about 60 or 70 runs. So it's a complete over-reliance on her. They also don't have Deandra Dottin with them either, because she picked up that injury in the later stages of the WPL, and the rest of their side really haven't found their rhythm. There hasn't been those explosions from Chanel Henry that she showed in the IPL. Campbell's come in and not really done anything. I think Zayda James is their second leading run scorer, but the difference is so much you still wouldn't look at her tournament in isolation and go, that's a good tournament. But they lost that game, and then they narrowly beat Ireland in a rain-affected game. So I think it was shortened to a 33-over contest, and they won that by either 6 or 9 runs. I can't remember exactly which.
6 runs. Yeah.
6 runs. So that was a really tight game. I guess one thing you can say before the Pakistan game is that the loss was so tight that it didn't massively affect their net run rate, which they will have to rely on regardless, I think, to qualify. So that's a positive. But the loss to Pakistan is probably the decisive one when you look at it, both in terms of net run rate, and if they were going to really mount a chance to qualify for the tournament, then they were going to have to win that one. But if they do come back, it will probably be one of the great over-reliance on one player's stories of one player qualifying by himself.
It feels very different to their normal over-reliance on Hayley Matthews, in that when they're playing Australia, for example, that's a little bit more understandable. But I think it's, from a West Indies point of view, it's a massive shame that at a lower level, against sides that aren't the top tier, that over-reliance is almost exactly the same, if anything, as you say, from this tournament, been exaggerated at this slightly lower level.
Potentially there's a factor of conditions as well, and the pitch, and that the pitches have been slower. So when they were bowled out for 120 something against Pakistan, that's Pakistan in home conditions, in conditions that they thrive in. So you can give them a little bit of slack for that, in that their kind of blitzing approach doesn't quite work on these types of pitches, but you would have expected better from them, I think it's fair to say. And this will be, if they don't qualify, I think the first World Cup since 2000 they wouldn't have been participating in women's 50-over competition, so it's quite significant.
Yeah, on the net run rate thing, it's true they haven't, I mean, they got, as you say, beaten reasonably heavily by Pakistan in a game that you'd expect to they were chasing less than 200. They should at least get close in that. And I guess also, if it is going to be a net run, it's going to be against Bangladesh's, whose net run rate is very good at the moment because they absolutely smashed Thailand. I mean, there's two stories there with Bangladesh. There's their captain Sultana, who she before this tournament had an ODI strike rate overall of about 52, and this tournament is like averaging about 110 and striking at about 110. She made a brilliant 100 against Thailand, 50 against Bangladesh. I think it was another score against Scotland. But that Ireland game was also an absolutely brilliant game where Bangladesh were 186 for 8, chasing 236, needing 50 to win. And Ritu Moni, who had a high score of 33 in ODIs coming into that game, puts in a brilliant partnership with the number 10, hits 67 off 61, guides them home, wins it with a 6. So that's just another example of how, exciting some of the games in this competition have been, at least.
More generally, Ben, there's been some scrutiny over the qualifying process for this qualifier. Do you want to explain it and also explain why it's suboptimal? Yeah,
well, we talked a bit last week about sort of Thailand's struggles and how they've been sort of set up to fail a little bit because of the lack of cricket they played between now and that previous one where they came very close to qualifying for the World Cup before COVID ruled it out. But also, in some ways, you could say they're sort of fortunate to be in this competition based on the criteria that the IC have chosen. And I'm going to say some things, and it's going to be one of those things where if it sounds like it's total nonsense and that can't be the way that it is, that probably means you're actually understanding it okay.
Okay.
So
if you make sense, then you've explained it wrong.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
Or if you think, oh yeah, that sounds like a good way to do things, then yeah, I said it wrong. So the qualification for this tournament was decided on ODI rankings, which I guess that sounds like it makes sense. Yeah. Except that, firstly, very few women's teams have an ODI ranking, including some pretty good ones who we'll come to. And also, even the lower ranked teams who have ODI rankings, because they're not part of the Women's Championship, they barely play ODIs. So Thailand had a ranking that got them into this competition, but have only played 10 ODIs in their history, all of which have come against, or before the tournament had played 10 ODIs in history, all of which have come against Netherlands and Zimbabwe, and the last of which was in July 2023. So they qualified for this tournament based on playing 10 games against Netherlands and Zimbabwe, neither of whom are in this competition either. And that's how they have made it into it. And then there are teams like UAE who have like actually a pretty good record in T20 cricket, at least recently. Like they've beaten Thailand the last 2 times they've played them. But there was no way they could have ever qualified for this World Cup, basically, based on what the IC said. Whereas, an ideal situation would be actually some sort of actual pathway where you have maybe a regional set of competitions.
Which is how it works for T20 World Cups and also men's 50 over World Cups.
Exactly, yeah. But they have. But basically, I think the IC like to use their ranking systems as sort of like
look, this is a worthwhile thing.
In place of they like to just give teams ODI status, so it seems like they're doing something, and then they use the ODI status to decide things, even though it doesn't really mean anything. As we saw with the last World Cup qualifier, when Thailand were screwed over because the tournament was decided based on ODI rankings, despite them not having had ODI status, even though they were one of the best teams in that competition when it got cancelled. And then it's not going to get any better for 2029 either, because the Women's Championship from 2025 onwards, they've expanded it by 1 team. The team they've added is Zimbabwe, who they're in there because they're a full member. That's the only reason. Like, if you look at it from a cricketing point of view, there's no case to be made really that they deserve to be in it. And obviously, great for everyone to play more cricket, but there are more deserving sides. Basically, like they played a tri-series against Namibia in the UAE, and they were getting beaten pretty comprehensively by both those sides. In the Women's T20 World Cup qualifier, they got beaten by Vanuatu, and they are in this Women's Championship where they're going to get to play ODIs against loads of the best sides in the world over Thailand, Scotland. So it's not a great situation. I think it's an example of, makes you understand why people think that the ICC shouldn't be the ones running women's cricket. That needs a separate governing body, because it's an afterthought, basically, if that, I guess.
Well, those 3 of those ODIs that Thailand played were beating Zimbabwe 3-0 in a bilateral series, right, 2 years ago. So that kind of shows how much thought was put into it.
Subtext behind all of this: 2 teams from this tournament qualify for an 8-team World Cup. It's not really a World Cup, is it, Katya?
No, I mean, well, we have this conversation about the men's tournament as well, and that there are only 10 teams in that one. And I think was it 8 teams again in the 2022 tournament for this? Yeah. It's not really a global World Cup, but when you look at the teams who have ODI status, there are so few teams that do have ODI status. It is the majority of those teams that do. And I guess it's kind of, what do you place your emphasis on? Do you place your emphasis on giving sides full ODI membership? And is that the way you measure development? And if it's all futuristic of women's cricket kind of stuff, and it again shows that, like Ben said, it's kind of the afterthought, not knowing how to put a tournament together. And I think there's also an element of that there's not a lot of bothering with the Women's Cricket World Cup from the ICC. It feels like a lot of the time it's a pre-set conclusion that either Australia will win or one of the next 4 teams will win. So below that, it doesn't really matter, when that's obviously not the case. But then there's also other stuff about if you do add those 10 teams in. So let's say you do take the actual best 8 ODI sides in the world, and then you expand the World Cup by 4 teams, you are going to have some terrible mismatches. And that will be kind of the explanation that people use for it. I don't have a massive problem at the minute with an 8-team World Cup, but the qualification process has to be fairer for it, and there has to be teams who are allowed a fairer crack at the whip, as it were.
I feel like, given that this qualifier has shown how closely matched all of these teams are, or at least I guess with the exception of Thailand to an extent, although they've improved since that opening game, I think that makes a real case for me. I would like to have seen all these sides in the World Cup, to be honest, and that actually, like, World Cups
2 groups of 7, that sort of thing,
or of 6 it would be, would it? Yeah, so a 12-team World Cup with 2 groups of 6. Because I think World Cup's about two things. They're deciding, it's about the title at the end of it, but it's also about a celebration of world cricket. And I guess the other thing with women's cricket,
just on that, because you've got really good games this competition, very hard to watch it.
Yes,
whereas
exactly.
if you have these games at a World Cup, that is, even though the games are exactly the same, that is a celebration in a World Cup. Yeah,
exactly. And you get amazing moments when a team gets their first World Cup win. That is a great thing, even if that team doesn't have a huge chance of actually, winning the whole tournament. I guess the other thing as well is that it's you're right that they see it as that they don't seem to care much about it, which is such a shame, because actually I know it's great that more women's test cricket is being played, but in a way that's different to men's cricket. Like ODI cricket is actually, that is the pinnacle in women's cricket. So to actually have it kind of closed off as it is, and it's also why you should always be wary when they're talking about T20 cricket as this growth vehicle, because that's really a sort of a way of saying that means we're not going to try and expand the other stuff, which they kind of haven't really done, because not just with the size of the World Cup, but with these other competitions, they could have had, a way to bring loads more teams into this to make it more accessible to more teams, and they haven't done that.
I guess the thing is with the size, so one of Pakistan, Bangladesh, West Indies will qualify likely, at least, so 2 of, will qualify likely for this World Cup. Let's say that's not the West Indies. It's hard you could see a situation where the West Indies don't qualify for this World Cup, but had they qualified, they might have been a contender for a semi-final place, which feels like a weird way to go about it. So if you're talking about a 12-team World Cup, I can see how that would happen, but I think it's more important that you make sure the right teams are there, if that makes sense. So you don't just include Zimbabwe because they're in the Women's Championship or whatever. You need to have a proper qualification process and a way to get through to these finals. So it's not so much the teams that are, or like the size of it, it's making sure the right teams are there. Because I think whatever you look at it, let's say Bangladesh qualify for this World Cup, it's hard to see Bangladesh threatening for a semi-final place in the World Cup in a few months' time. For me, anyway, I don't think they will. But you could see the West Indies. So you've got to find a way of making sure those teams are in the World Cup, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I am making
Which
sense,
is by having a bigger tournament, basically.
But I think that's right, that if you're going to expand the tournament, make sure you have a robust pathway system, because there's a possibility that they expand it to 12 for next time, and that just ends up including Zimbabwe, say, and then they take the place of a more deserving, better team, possibly. Although Zimbabwe might be better by 2029, given they will play 4 years of ODI cricket against some of the world's best sides.
Do you think that the 50 over conversation isn't happening enough? So in England, obviously, when we talk to English players, etc., Test cricket is the question about should they be playing more of it, because they play a lot of 50 over cricket internationally. But actually, when you look, you don't have to go that far down the food chain to see a massive drop off in 50 over cricket being played. And it's actually, women's cricket is in danger of effectively, basically default is T20 cricket, and then there's some 50 over cricket sprinkled on top of that.
But I think that's already the case. The default is, especially for the women's game, the default is T20 cricket. And I think for the last 5 years at least, that has been explicitly stated that they see the growth in the white ball game, and the white ball game effectively mostly has become the T20 game for all intents and purposes over the last few years. And I think that's because the ICC see the T20 game as a quick way to kind of drive up competition, get more of these teams up to standard, and then maybe one day in the future look at ODI cricket, if the ODI cricket is even a thing by then. So you see the knock-on effects of it now, as in like Thailand not playing an ODI for 2 years before doing this. So I don't think that's a like far off worry. I think that has already happened.
But my question was like, should people like us, should the media be talking about it more?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, you go, but absolutely.
Yeah, no, and I guess the thing is that for at least until 2029, we know there will be a decent amount of ODIs played because there's this women's championship in place and the FTP is out there. So at least for the top teams, and that goes, the top 10 and then Zimbabwe, they will play a decent amount of ODIs. But yeah, totally the conversation that we should be having is like, what is the pathway for the teams below that to push up to the top level and compete with those teams? And that's where we're not discussing it, because the total drive for growth is just in the T20 format. But why not try and expand both things? Why not have like some sort of meritocratic system that allows the likes of UAE, Netherlands, Thailand, obviously, to get better and to actually see, okay, if we win this and we win this and then we win this, then we're in the World Cup. Great, which doesn't exist at the moment, I guess.
But a lot of these sides, so like your Zimbabwe's and your kind of lesser, like second, third tier of sides, are investing in women's pathways, or have been investing in women's pathways for the first time, where there were none really there, say 20 years ago. And if you look at the way that cricket is, if there was men's cricket just developing now, test matches wouldn't be a thing. It would be primarily white ball. So the growth of the game is T20. So boards aren't prioritising that longer format because they're establishing these pathways for the first time in this environment for cricket. So it's kind of, the solution isn't just the governance level, it's deeper than that. It's more kind of structural at a national board level as well.
No, 100%. It'll be fascinating to see how the rest of the qualifier plays out. I mean, listeners, you might already know how it ends up by the time you listen to this. Anyway, cheers Katya, cheers Ben. This has been the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly Podcast. Cheers for listening. We'll be back next week.